In 1962, a tiny British racing team from a cluster of workshops in Bourne, Lincolnshire, arrived at the Monaco Grand Prix carrying a Formula One car that looked hopelessly outgunned. Behind the driver sat a brand new V8 engine, built not by a giant industrial empire, but by a company that had spent years stumbling from one failure to the next. Across the paddock stood Ferrari, backed by the might of Maranello and armed with a screaming 12-cylinder machine that many believed represented the future of Grand Prix racing. By the end of that same season, the British car everyone had written off had won the Formula One World Championship, humiliated Ferrari on Europe's greatest circuits, and restored Britain's pride after years of disappointment. This is the story of the 1962 BRM P57. Long before the BRM P57 became a champion, British racing motors had become a national embarrassment. The project began in the aftermath of the Second World War, when Britain desperately wanted to prove it could compete with the great European manufacturers. Italy had Ferrari, Germany had Mercedes-Benz. Britain had talented engineers, gifted drivers, and passionate supporters, but no true works Formula One team. Industrialist Raymond Mays believed Britain deserved one. Together with engineer Peter Berthon, he launched British Racing Motors in Bourne, a quiet market town in Lincolnshire. Instead of relying on one wealthy owner, BRM was financed through the British Motor Racing Research Trust, a partnership involving more than 100 British companies. It sounded patriotic. It also sounded incredibly complicated. Every important decision required cooperation between dozens of suppliers. Delays multiplied. Parts arrived late. Instead of operating like Ferrari's tightly controlled factory in Maranello, BRM resembled a committee trying to build a racing car. Their first Formula One machine, the notorious Type 15, featured an extraordinarily ambitious 1.5-litre supercharged V16 engine. On paper, it promised nearly 600 horsepower. In reality, it became one of the most temperamental engines Formula One had ever seen. Drivers complained about violent power delivery. Mechanics struggled to keep it running. While Ferrari concentrated on building reliable racing cars, BRM chased engineering perfection. The difference was devastating. By the late 1950s, many people inside Formula One believed BRM had become little more than an expensive patriotic fantasy. Enzo Ferrari had little respect for Britain's collection of independent constructors. He famously referred to many British teams as garagisti, garage owners and assemblers, rather than true manufacturers. To Ferrari, championships were built inside great factories, not in small British workshops. What Ferrari did not know was that those supposedly insignificant workshops were quietly learning lessons that would eventually overturn Formula One itself. By 1959, BRM's future looked bleak. Money was disappearing. Results were almost non-existent. Instead of disappearing, salvation arrived from an unexpected direction. The Rubery-Owen Engineering Group assumed control of BRM. At its head stood Sir Alfred Owen, a successful industrialist whose family believed Britain should still have a factory Formula One team. Unlike many wealthy owners, Owen rarely sought publicity. He simply wanted the cars to become competitive. He placed capable people in charge, reduced unnecessary politics, and allowed engineers to focus on solving problems. It was not glamorous. It was exactly what BRM needed. One of the key figures during this transformation was Tony Rudd, a gifted engineer whose calm, methodical approach contrasted sharply with BRM's earlier culture of chasing impossible ideas. Rudd believed championships were won through reliability, not clever headlines. That philosophy changed everything. For 1961, the World Championship introduced new regulations limiting engines to 1.5 litres. Overnight, every constructor faced the challenge of designing an entirely new generation of racing cars. Ferrari adapted quickly. Their elegant 156 shark-nose Ferrari, powered by a compact V6 engine, dominated much of the 1961 season. American driver Phil Hill captured the World Championship. Ferrari looked unstoppable. Meanwhile, BRM quietly started work on an entirely different answer. Instead of chasing ever more cylinders or revolutionary complexity, Tony Rudd's engineers pursued balance. They designed a 90-degree V8, compact enough to fit neatly into a lightweight chassis while still delivering impressive power. Early versions produced approximately 185 horsepower. Development quickly pushed output beyond 190 horsepower. The figures looked similar to Ferrari's. The delivery did not. Drivers immediately noticed smoother acceleration, predictable handling, and improved reliability. According to period accounts, testing at circuits like Goodwood and Silverstone revealed another unexpected advantage. The engine kept improving. Every test uncovered another small gain. Ferrari watched Britain's progress with confidence. That confidence was about to become the most expensive mistake of the 1962 season. A great racing car still needs a driver capable of extracting everything from it. BRM found exactly that in Graham Hill, a tall, determined Londoner whose route into Formula One looked nothing like the polished careers of many continental stars. Hill had not grown up surrounded by wealth or motorsport connections. Before becoming a professional racing driver, he worked as an apprentice engineer at Smith's Instruments. He even paid for his early racing by working multiple jobs. Progress came slowly. That was precisely why he fit BRM. While Ferrari employed drivers already recognized as international stars, BRM built around a man who understood machinery almost as well as the engineers themselves. Tony Rudd later spoke highly of Hill's ability to describe technical problems with unusual precision. Rather than simply saying the car felt unstable, Hill could explain exactly when the rear suspension loaded up, how the steering behaved under braking, and where the engine lost responsiveness. Those details mattered. Every race weekend became another engineering exercise. One former team member remembered evenings stretching long past midnight, with mechanics stripping the V8 almost completely before dawn, measuring bearing wear, checking valve clearances, and searching for tiny cracks. It was exhausting work, but it was honest work. While Ferrari relied on the confidence that came from recent championships, BRM relied on preparation. Building a competitive Formula One engine in 1962 was not simply about producing the biggest horsepower number. The real challenge was producing that power for nearly 2 hours without destroying itself. Tony Rudd and his engineers built a 1.5-litre naturally aspirated 90-degree V8 with double overhead camshafts and Lucas mechanical fuel injection. By mid-1962, it was producing around 190 to 195 horsepower at nearly 10,500 revolutions per minute. The numbers alone did not win races. The way the engine delivered its power did. Instead of producing one violent surge near maximum speed, the BRM V8 accelerated smoothly through the rev range. Drivers could apply throttle earlier exiting corners without upsetting the balance of the car. At Monaco, Rouen, Nürburgring, and Zandvoort, drivers accelerated dozens of times every lap. Gaining only a fraction of a second at every corner eventually became several seconds over an entire race. That was where championships were won. Finding reliability at those engine speeds was another enormous challenge. Valve springs frequently failed, bearings overheated, gear-driven camshafts could wear rapidly. BRM's solution was not glamorous, it was careful engineering. Improved oil circulation, stronger internal components, and endless hours of testing gradually transformed the engine from an unpredictable machine into one mechanics genuinely trusted. While Ferrari continued believing outright performance would overwhelm everyone else, BRM concentrated on finishing races. The BRM P57 did not suddenly become a championship-winning car. It earned every improvement the difficult way. The chassis used a steel tubular space frame wrapped in lightweight aluminium body panels. Compared with increasingly sophisticated monocoque ideas beginning to appear elsewhere, it looked almost old-fashioned. In reality, it was beautifully practical. If a tube cracked, mechanics could repair it quickly. If suspension geometry needed changing, engineers could modify the structure without rebuilding the entire car. The suspension used unequal-length wishbones and coil springs designed to keep all four tires working evenly over rough circuits. Many European tracks in 1962 were nothing like today's smooth Grand Prix venues. The Nürburgring measured more than 14 miles and contained over 170 corners. A nervous racing car became exhausting there. The BRM remained composed. Graham Hill repeatedly praised the car's balance rather than its outright speed. That comment revealed everything. Drivers often describe the fastest car. Champions describe the easiest one to drive at 10/10ths. The compact V8 occupied less space than many rival engines, allowing engineers to package the car neatly. The center of gravity stayed low, making direction changes more predictable. One mechanic later recalled that after long testing sessions, Graham Hill would climb out covered in oil and dust, remove his gloves, smile briefly, and simply say, "We're getting there." No celebration, no drama, just confidence. The breakthrough did not happen in one spectacular moment. It arrived one careful race at a time. The 1962 Monaco Grand Prix became the first major sign that BRM had built something extraordinary. Monaco rewarded precision more than power, perfect conditions for the balanced BRM. Graham Hill qualified strongly and immediately demonstrated that the British car belonged among the leaders. Although mechanical problems denied him victory that afternoon, the pace shocked the paddock. Over the following races, the team refined suspension settings, improved cooling, and extracted still more performance from the V8. Victories followed. At the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, Graham Hill delivered BRM's first World Championship victory of the season with an assured drive. The British team that had spent years being mocked was suddenly leading races with confidence. Those garage builders were now beating factory cars on pure pace. According to period accounts, rival teams began paying much closer attention whenever BRM removed its engine cover in the paddock. Nobody admitted it publicly. Everyone wanted to know what the British had found. Quick pause before numbers 3, 2, and 1, because everything from here on is where the World Championship itself is decided, and where one mistake could have handed Ferrari another title. I go through the comments on every one of these videos, so if there is a car, driver, or racing era from this period you want covered next, leave it down there. And if stories like this one are your kind of thing, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure the next one finds you. Now, back to 1962. By the middle of the 1962 Formula One season, nobody laughed at BRM anymore. Graham Hill followed his victory at Zandvoort with another commanding performance at the German Grand Prix on the fearsome Nürburgring. The Nordschleife was regarded as the ultimate examination of both machine and driver. More than 170 corners, blind crests, steep climbs, and almost no margin for error. While Ferrari relied on outright speed, BRM relied on balance. Hill drove with remarkable precision, conserving both the car and its tires, while rivals pushed harder, trying to match his pace. He won again. The championship standings suddenly looked very different. Ferrari still possessed enormous resources and immense prestige, but prestige no longer earned championship points. What Ferrari did not know was that the psychological battle had already shifted. The British team no longer believed they could compete. They believed they could win. By September 1962, Formula One had become a two-team fight. Ferrari still carried the weight of history. Enzo Ferrari believed championships belonged to manufacturers that built everything themselves inside vast factories. Across the paddock stood British Racing Motors, a team that had spent years rebuilding its reputation one race at a time. Graham Hill had established himself as BRM's title contender, but one retirement, one broken gearbox, or one failed bearing could erase months of work. That was the reality of Formula One in 1962. Drivers wore little more than cotton overalls, open-face helmets, and courage. Circuits were lined with trees, telegraph poles, and stone walls rather than energy-absorbing barriers. One BRM mechanic later remembered that nobody celebrated victories for very long. The cars were stripped almost immediately after returning to Bourne. Every component was inspected for tiny cracks. While Ferrari relied on generations of experience, BRM relied on relentless preparation. At circuits like Monza and Watkins Glen, the British cars no longer arrived hoping for podiums. They arrived expecting to fight for victory. According to period accounts, rival engineers increasingly wandered through the BRM garage searching for clues. There was no magical invention hidden beneath the aluminium bodywork. The secret was discipline. Everything worked together. What the establishment did not know was that BRM had quietly built the most complete Formula One package in the field, simply the one least likely to fail. Championships have always rewarded that kind of engineering. The World Championship came down to the final round. The 1962 South African Grand Prix, held at East London on December 29th, would decide everything. Every person inside the BRM garage understood what was at stake. Britain had never produced a Formula One world champion driving for a British constructor. BRM had spent more than a decade chasing that dream. Now it rested on one afternoon. Graham Hill entered the weekend leading the championship, but reliability mattered most. A mechanical retirement could hand the title away. Mechanics who had spent years being ridiculed suddenly found themselves preparing perhaps the most important British racing car since the war. Tony Rudd remained remarkably calm. Hill approached the weekend the same way he approached every race, methodically. He walked the circuit, he spoke with engineers, he discussed gear ratios, fuel loads, and tyre wear. There were no emotional speeches, only preparation. During practice, the BRM again demonstrated the balance that had defined its campaign. The V8 pulled cleanly, temperatures remained stable, and the car behaved predictably. It looked ready. Race day arrived beneath warm South African skies. When the flag dropped, Hill drove exactly as he had all season, calmly. There was no desperate attempt to win the race in the opening laps. He protected the car. He settled into rhythm. He allowed the championship to come to him. Lap after lap, the BRM remained beautifully consistent. Oil pressure stayed healthy, water temperature remained under control, the gearbox continued selecting each ratio cleanly. While other drivers attacked the circuit, Hill concentrated on avoiding mistakes. For nearly 2 hours, every vibration through the steering wheel, every change in engine note carried information. Hill listened to the car as much as he drove it. Around him, rivals encountered the problems that had haunted Formula One throughout its early years: mechanical failures, handling issues, lost time. The BRM simply kept circulating. The same reliability that had been forged through years of disappointment was now carrying Britain toward the World Championship. Not because the BRM destroyed Ferrari with overwhelming speed, because it refused to break. When the checkered flag finally fell, Graham Hill finished second, behind Jim Clark driving for Lotus. Second place was enough. The championship belonged to Graham Hill. The 1962 Formula One World Drivers' Championship had been won by a British driver in a British-built car powered by a British-designed V8. For BRM, the achievement meant even more. After years of failed experiments, broken engines, public criticism, and endless jokes, British racing motors had finally justified the faith of everyone who had refused to let the project die. Raymond Mays, whose dream had launched the team, finally watched Britain stand at the summit of Formula One. It was the vindication he had chased since the late 1940s. The legacy reached far beyond one championship. Within only a few years, the balance of Formula One shifted permanently toward Britain. Lotus, Cooper, Brabham, McLaren, Tyrrell, Williams. Later came Red Bull Racing, still operating from the same remarkable British motorsport valley. The centre of Formula One engineering moved away from Italy and toward Britain. Cars like the BRM P57 made it possible. Its compact V8 proved that intelligent engineering could overcome greater resources. Its disciplined development showed that reliability often defeated raw horsepower. Ferrari laughed at Britain's garage builders. They called them garagisti. Then one of those supposedly insignificant British teams built a V8 in a modest workshop, defeated the establishment, and claimed the world championship. What Enzo Ferrari dismissed as garage engineering became the blueprint for modern Formula One. That is why the BRM P57 matters. Not because it was the fastest racing car ever built, not because it won the most races, because it proved that determination, intelligent engineering, and relentless preparation could humble giants. And once Britain discovered that, Formula One would never look the same again. If you enjoyed this story, there are plenty more like it on the channel. Hit subscribe, and I will make it worth your time.